The cashier had already announced the total when the elderly woman quietly opened her worn handbag and froze. Her hands trembled as she searched through every pocket, counting crumpled notes and loose coins beneath the harsh supermarket lights. Behind her, an impatient line began to form. Someone sighed. Someone else glanced at the clock. The old woman lowered her eyes, her face turning red with embarrassment as she realized she was still short. She had already placed several groceries on the counter, groceries that were clearly more necessity than luxury: bread, milk, rice, eggs, a small packet of medicine, and a few inexpensive vegetables. Then a young woman standing behind her stepped forward and quietly placed her bank card beside the cashier's machine. She did not know the old woman. She did not know that the elderly stranger had a son whose name appeared on the city's tallest buildings. She certainly did not know that within 24 hours, she would be sitting across from that millionaire's son in the most important job interview of her life. And she had no idea that the simple decision she was about to make would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe people deserve second chances, and if you believe one small act can completely change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need a reminder that goodness still exists. The young woman's name was Clare Morgan, and at 34 years old, she had become an expert at hiding how tired she really was. She had learned how to smile during difficult conversations, how to stretch a small amount of money across too many expenses, and how to say she was fine when she was anything but fine. That afternoon, she had entered the supermarket with a carefully written list folded inside her wallet. She had exactly enough money to buy groceries for herself and her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and absolutely nothing more. Claire had been unemployed for 6 weeks, and every day without work had made the pressure inside her chest heavier. The small apartment she shared with Emma was clean and comfortable but modest. The rent was due in 4 days. The electricity bill was waiting on the kitchen counter. Emma needed new school shoes. And Claire had been surviving on the savings she had promised herself she would never touch. She had not expected to stop at the supermarket that afternoon for anything except milk and bread, but she had noticed the elderly woman standing near the checkout. There was something about her that made Claire slow down. The woman looked exhausted. Her silver hair was neatly arranged despite the tiredness in her face, and she wore a simple navy cardigan over a pale blouse. She kept checking her purse with growing panic. Claire watched as the cashier told her the amount. The woman counted her money once, then twice, then a third time. Her shoulders slowly dropped. Claire could have looked away. She could have pretended not to notice. She could have told herself that she had problems of her own. Instead, she stepped forward. The elderly woman tried to protest, embarrassed that a stranger would pay for her. But Claire simply smiled and told the cashier to put everything on her card. The groceries were not expensive, but to Claire, even that amount mattered. It was money she could have used for Emma's breakfast. It was money she could have saved for the electricity bill. It was money she genuinely could not afford to lose. Yet as Claire walked away with her own small grocery bag, she felt strangely lighter. The elderly woman stood outside the supermarket for several moments, watching Claire disappear into the crowd. She did not know her name. She did not know where she lived. She only knew that when the world had made her feel invisible, one young woman had treated her as though she mattered. Claire, meanwhile, walked home without giving the encounter another thought. That night, Emma sat at the small kitchen table doing her homework while Claire prepared a simple dinner. The apartment smelled of tomato soup and toasted bread. Claire checked her bank balance on her phone and immediately felt the familiar knot return to her stomach. She had less than she needed to cover the bills, and she still had no job. Her phone buzzed. An email had arrived. Claire stared at the screen for several seconds before opening it. It was from a company called Sterling Holdings. She had applied for an executive administrative position nearly 3 weeks earlier. She had almost forgotten about it because dozens of applications had already been rejected. But this email was different. They wanted to interview her. The interview was scheduled for the next morning. Claire read the message twice. Sterling Holdings was not an ordinary company. It was one of the largest privately owned investment groups in the city, led by a businessman named Alexander Sterling. At 43, Alexander was known for building a business empire from the ground up. Financial magazines described him as disciplined, private, brilliant, and ruthless when necessary. His companies employed thousands of people. His name appeared regularly in newspapers. His face was familiar to almost everyone. Claire had heard of him. She had never met him. And she certainly never imagined that the old woman at the supermarket had a connection to him. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise. She ironed the only professional blouse she owned and carefully prepared for the interview. She chose a modest navy skirt and simple black shoes. Her long chestnut brown hair was brushed and arranged neatly. She looked into the mirror and tried to convince herself that she was not afraid. Emma hugged her before she left. Claire kissed her forehead and promised she would be back soon. She took the bus across the city towards Sterling Holdings, holding her folder tightly against her chest. The building seemed almost impossibly large when she arrived. Glass walls rose dozens of stories above the street. People in expensive suits moved quickly through the lobby. Claire suddenly became aware of every detail of her own appearance. Her shoes were polished, but old. Her handbag had been repaired twice. Her blouse was elegant but inexpensive. She took a slow breath and walked inside. Meanwhile, several floors above her, Alexander Sterling stood beside a conference room window reviewing a candidate file. But he was not thinking about Claire. He was thinking about his mother. His mother, Eleanor Sterling, had always been the one person in his life who could make him forget his position, his money, and his responsibilities. She had raised him alone after his father died when Alexander was young. She had taught him that wealth meant nothing if you could not use it to make someone else's life easier. Yet as Alexander became more successful, Eleanor became increasingly independent. She hated being treated like a fragile old woman. She refused private drivers when she could walk. She shopped for herself. She insisted on living in her own home. That morning, however, she had called Alexander and mentioned that a stranger had paid for her groceries. Alexander had been surprised. He had asked who the woman was. Eleanor had only said that she was young, kind, and clearly struggling herself. Something about that had stayed with him. He had asked his assistant to review the names of the candidates scheduled for interviews that day. Claire Morgan was first. Alexander entered the conference room just as Claire was waiting outside. She stood when he walked in. For one brief second, neither of them spoke. Alexander studied her resume. Claire tried to steady her breathing. He began asking questions about her previous work experience, her organizational skills, and how she handled pressure. Claire answered honestly. She did not exaggerate. She did not pretend to be more impressive than she was. When he asked why she had left her previous position, she explained that the company had downsized and her entire department had been eliminated. When he asked why she wanted to work for Sterling Holdings, she said she needed stability but also wanted a place where her skills could be useful. Alexander listened carefully. Something about her felt familiar. Not her face, her manner, the way she looked directly at him without trying to impress him. The way she paused before answering difficult questions. The way she spoke about responsibility. Then Alexander asked her a question that changed the atmosphere in the room. He asked whether she believed people should help strangers when they were struggling themselves. Claire looked confused by the question. She answered that people should help when they can, but sometimes helping someone does not mean giving them everything you have. Sometimes it means simply refusing to let them feel alone. Alexander leaned back. Those words reminded him of his mother. But there was still something he did not understand. Before the interview ended, Alexander thanked her and told her that someone from Human Resources would contact her. Claire left the building believing she had probably failed. She had no idea that Alexander had already begun investigating something. Because while she was in the elevator, Alexander received a message from his assistant. Security footage from the supermarket had been located. Eleanor had mentioned the supermarket that morning, and Alexander, worried about her, had asked for confirmation that she had returned home safely. The footage showed Eleanor standing at the checkout. It showed her searching her purse. And then it showed a young woman stepping forward. Alexander watched the video once. Then again. Then he froze. The woman on the screen was Claire. The candidate who had just sat across from him. The woman who had applied for a job at his company. The woman who had paid for his mother's groceries. Alexander stared at the screen for a long time. He could not understand it. Claire had not mentioned the incident. She had not tried to use it to impress him. She had not even known who Eleanor was. And that was exactly what made the act meaningful. Alexander had spent years meeting people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted contracts. Executives wanted promotions. Strangers wanted favors. People smiled because they knew his name. Clare had helped his mother when she believed nobody important was watching. Alexander stood silently beside the desk. Then he noticed something else. The amount Clare had paid was small. But her bank statement, obtained through a legitimate background verification process, showed that she had been living under serious financial pressure. She had still helped Eleanor. Alexander felt something he had not expected. Respect. But there was a problem. The interview process had not been completed. And another candidate had stronger qualifications on paper. Alexander had always believed that hiring should be based on ability, not sympathy. He refused to give Clare the position simply because she had helped his mother. So he asked the human resources team to continue the process normally. But he also asked them to investigate Clare's previous employment history carefully. What they discovered surprised him. Clare had been an exceptional employee. At her previous company, she had received outstanding performance reviews. She had created a system that saved her department hundreds of hours each year. She had trained new employees without being asked. She had even taken responsibility for a major client project after another employee resigned unexpectedly. Yet she had been laid off when the company faced financial difficulties. There was no misconduct, no failure, no hidden problem. She was simply one of many people who had lost their jobs. Alexander read the reports late into the evening. Then his assistant brought him another piece of information. Clare was raising her daughter alone. Alexander looked at the clock. It was nearly 9. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about Clare. He thought about how easily people could disappear behind statistics, resumes, job applications, and financial numbers. And for the first time in years, Alexander questioned whether he had been looking at people correctly. The next morning, Clare received a call asking her to return to Sterling Holdings. She was nervous. She wondered if they needed another interview. When she entered the building, she was taken directly to Alexander's office. He was standing near the window. On his desk was a small paper bag. Clare recognized it immediately. It was the same kind of bag the supermarket used. Alexander told her that the woman she had helped was his mother. Clare's face changed. She suddenly understood. She remembered the elderly woman's gentle expression. She remembered how embarrassed she had looked. She remembered paying for the groceries. And then Clare became uncomfortable because she assumed the entire interview had been some kind of test. She explained that she had not known who the woman was. She had not helped her because of Alexander. She had helped because she had been embarrassed herself many times and knew how painful it was to feel powerless in front of strangers. Alexander listened. Then he told Clare something she would never forget. He said that his mother had taught him that the true character of a person was revealed when there was nothing to gain. Clare looked down. For the first time in weeks, tears filled her eyes. Not because she had been offered a job, but because someone had finally seen the person behind her struggle. Alexander offered her the position. But not as charity. He offered it because she had the qualifications, the discipline, and the character to succeed. Clare accepted. Her first weeks at Sterling Holdings were difficult. She had to learn new systems, new expectations, and a completely different corporate culture. Some employees assumed she had received special treatment. Others whispered that Alexander had hired her because she had helped his mother. Clare ignored them. She arrived early. She stayed focused. She worked harder than anyone expected. And slowly, people began to notice. She solved problems. She organized chaos. She helped colleagues without making them feel incompetent. She treated the cleaning staff with the same respect she showed executives. She remembered birthdays. She checked on employees who seemed overwhelmed. She became the person people trusted. Even Alexander began relying on her judgment. But the biggest change happened between Clare and Eleanor. Eleanor began inviting Clare to lunch. Sometimes they spoke about work. Sometimes they spoke about motherhood. Sometimes they simply sat together quietly. Eleanor eventually told Clare that the day at the supermarket had been one of the loneliest days she had experienced in years. She had not been unable to afford the groceries because she had no money. She had accidentally left her wallet containing most of her cards and cash at home. But when she stood at the checkout, she felt humiliated. Clare had given her dignity. That meant more than the groceries. Clare understood. Because dignity was exactly what she had been fighting to protect in her own life. Months passed. Claire's finances stabilized. Emma received new school shoes. The electricity bills were no longer frightening. The small apartment still looked the same, but Claire no longer sat at the kitchen table calculating which bill could wait. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Alexander asked Claire to come to his office. She assumed it was about work. Instead, he showed her a proposal. He wanted to create a community assistance program through Sterling Holdings. The program would help people facing temporary financial hardship, single parents, elderly individuals, unemployed workers, and families hit by sudden emergencies. Alexander wanted Claire to help design it. He said she understood something that financial experts often forgot. People did not always need someone to save them. Sometimes they simply needed someone to help them stand again. Claire stared at the proposal. She remembered the supermarket. She remembered counting her own money. She remembered thinking that helping Eleanor might make her own life harder. And yet somehow, that small sacrifice had opened a door she never knew existed. But Claire insisted on one condition. The program would never humiliate the people it helped. There would be no publicity designed to make recipients feel indebted. No photographs of struggling families holding checks. No public announcements revealing private circumstances. Alexander agreed. The program became one of the most successful initiatives Sterling Holdings had ever created. But Claire never considered herself a hero. She always said she had simply done what she hoped someone would do for her if she ever needed help. 1 year after the supermarket incident, Claire returned to the same store with Emma. They were walking toward the checkout when Emma suddenly tugged at her mother's hand. An elderly woman was standing near the register. She looked confused. She was searching through her purse. Claire stopped. For a moment, she wondered whether it could possibly be Eleanor. It was not. It was another woman. Another stranger. Another moment. Claire walked over. She gently asked if everything was okay. The woman explained that she was short on money. Claire looked at Emma. Emma smiled. Together, they paid the difference. As they walked outside, Emma asked her mother why she always helped people. Claire smiled. She told her daughter that kindness was not about having more than someone else. It was about remembering that everyone carries something you cannot see. That evening, Claire returned home and found a letter waiting for her. It was from Alexander. Inside was a photograph of Eleanor holding a grocery bag. On the back, there was a handwritten message from Eleanor thanking Claire for the day she had restored her dignity. Claire read the message twice. Then she cried. Not because she was sad. Because she finally understood how one ordinary decision could travel through a person's life like a ripple through water. She had thought she was simply paying for groceries. She had never imagined she was opening a door. And Alexander had thought he was hiring an employee. He never imagined he was discovering someone who would change the way his entire company viewed kindness. Years later, Claire would still remember that supermarket. She would remember the fluorescent lights, the impatient line, the trembling hands, the small amount of money she almost wished she had not spent. But she would also remember something more important. She would remember that sometimes the biggest turning points in life do not arrive with applause. They arrive quietly. They happen when nobody is watching. They happen when you choose compassion even though you are struggling yourself. And sometimes, the person you help today becomes part of the reason you survive tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support allows these emotional stories to reach people who may need a little hope, encouragement, or reminder that their good actions are never truly wasted. And before we end, I have a special request for you. If you believe that kindness should never depend on someone's wealth, status, or appearance, comment this line below: I will choose kindness, even when nobody is watching. Because you never know what someone is carrying. You never know how close they are to giving up. You never know how much a simple gesture might mean. Claire thought she had only paid for an elderly woman's groceries. But in reality, she had paid for something far more valuable. She had paid for a moment of dignity. And that moment came back to her, not as a reward, not as a favor, and not as luck, but as a reminder that goodness has a way of finding its way home. Sometimes the person standing in front of you is not a burden. Sometimes they are an opportunity to become the kind of person you hope the world will be when you need help. And sometimes, one small act of kindness is enough to change two lives forever.